now Nigeria is celebrating her independence. If you asked a message for this country, for our people, if you had a word for the old, the young, and the future, what would it be?
My message would be really simple. I think we're divided in many ways. Religion is one of those things that divides us. State lines is another thing that divides us, but there's this big elephant in the room that very few Nigerians talk about. And it's that tribal divide, like I just said, that it brings us back as Nigerians to our most primitive and base instincts. And it causes us to rely on tribal primitive nature as opposed to decency and morality and fairness and equity and celebration of diversity and uniqueness. And I think if we could get back to a place where we can heal those old tribal divides that the Civil War and the slave days left behind, and those distrust things that are still so passed down and handed down to the children. We can heal those divides. I think we can solve a good percent of the problem when we stop the infighting, because Nigeria is built on a foundation and a constitution that I think our founding fathers built it on, and it was morality, it was decency, it was all of these things, it was democracy. And democracy only works when there's celebration of one another's differences. And we could say it's Muslim, Christian, we can say all of those things, but I don't think that's the divide. I think the biggest thing that divides us is ancient, historic, tribal lines that we're still too afraid to cross and admit that those things were useful for a time, but if we want to move into a new millennium, we're going to have to find a way to forgive those things and move past those things. So my message to Nigeria on Independence Day is try and celebrate and find a reason to shake hands with the other side of the aisle. I think in America you have this thing called identity politics. You know, the LGBTQ are now part of a protected class. Everybody has their own protected classes. I think what happens in Nigeria is there is a form of identity politics that plays down to tribalism, where state governments or state policies are set to favor one tribe based on superficial qualities another tribe doesn't seem to possess. And that brings out the radicals. It brings out all of these natures on the inside of people. It brings out radical Islam. It brings out radical Christianity on both sides. And I think if we get rid of those things and we say, well, those worked in a day where we needed tribes, now we need to build a nation. What can we do to do that?
If you were to suggest 3 steps, for instance, to shaking hands across the divide, what would you say those 3 steps are?
My first step would be, I'm a Christian, and I think my first step would be to my church friends. I would reach out to my church friends and I would say, I don't think God sees it as black and white as we see it. I don't think God sees it as Islam and Christian as we see it. I think if Jesus were alive today, he would find that Samaritan woman, reach out to her, ask her for a drink, have a conversation with her, even if it made everybody look at him like it was crazy. I think so often as a church, we're so invested in a bigger building or a bigger cathedral. Nigeria doesn't need more cathedrals, doesn't need more churches. It needs people willing to reach a hand to the other aisle and to find out how can I influence you positively and create change without you feeling like I'm ultimately trying to invade or impede on your culture. And I know there are more complex issues than that. Another thing is invest in the next generation. You know, have a heart to see the next generation rise up. I mean, I believe that each generation is hardwired for something different. Every 20 years, a new generation is born, and we're now at a 4th turning of a new generation for a new millennium. This new generation has risen up with strength. They've risen up with technological skills, with technocratic abilities, and they want to see Nigeria come not just into a manufacturing era, which it's known for, but into a new technological era. And I think because they're hardwired for it, we need to throw a lot of support behind this new next upcoming generation. I think another thing is Nigeria has so much potential. I mean, manufacturing industries which are being decayed. You're talking about rural farming industries which are being decayed. People are surviving hand to mouth. And I think if we can find a way to invest in the infrastructure and in the successes of Nigeria and start seeking just exports from external countries and start investing in the materials that Nigeria can produce, I think we can see Nigeria blossom into a great nation. But it needs people bold enough and willing enough and brave enough in our government to make those kind of calls.
And finally, it's the last independence celebration before the next election. What are you expecting? Do you think there's going to be a change beyond what we know?
I think the social contract between government and the people have become skewed by lobbying interests and by tribal divides and all of these things that I think Nigerians in general are feeling a kind of political fatigue. I think all over the board there's a why vote? There's that question, why vote? We're just going to vote in the same thing as we voted in last time, or we're not going to vote in a political party, we're going to vote in a tribe. I think your vote matters. I think it's important that we get out of that apathy and that we put our feet up and we put our boots on and we make a decision anyway. And I think there are all these new emerging micro-political parties that are emerging. I think it's time for not just a spiritual revival. Nigeria is known for a spiritual revival. I think it's time Nigeria had a political revival. I think it's time they actually went and invested in an understanding of the government and pioneering a way forward. We're not in a season where our politicians have all the answers, and I believe that there are new politics rising up in the earth. And I think we have to have an eye out to see what's next, what's in the atmosphere. But I think also back to what are they expecting? I think they're expecting a democracy. I think they're expecting due democratic process, free of bullying, free of bias, free of people feeling subjugated or forced to vote for one party over another. I think they're expecting and I think they're hoping for that. But I just hope the apathy hasn't set in because of past mistakes and past errors.
That was Tomi Arayomi speaking his thoughts about this nation and as well as the thoughts of many Nigerians he's met in the diaspora and within the country as well. As we step into this 58th year, there is a lot of work to do and every one of us has a role to play. Would you play your own part in your own little corner? I'm Nell Tagwe. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.